The tavern door swung open with a heavy creak that made everyone inside go quiet. Emperor Kaithrak stepped through, and the air itself seemed to change. His body was massive, covered in deep crimson scales that caught the lamplight like rubies. His wings folded against his back, each one the size of a sail. His eyes were gold and ancient, carrying the weight of 300 years of ruling the Drakkar Imperium. When he moved, the wooden floorboards groaned under his weight. But it wasn't just the Emperor that caught attention. Cradled against his broad chest was something unexpected. A tiny dragon, no bigger than a human child. Prince Velmoth. The infant's scales were pale silver, almost translucent. His wings, though, were wrong. They were small and crooked, folded at odd angles against his tiny body. They didn't look like they'd ever work properly. The prince wheezed softly, struggling just to breathe. The tavern erupted instantly. People screamed. Tables overturned as humans scrambled for the exits, pushing and shoving each other in blind panic. A dragon emperor showing up without warning meant danger. It meant death. It meant the end of everything they knew. The bartender dropped his glasses. Someone knocked over a candle. The air filled with shouts and fear. But one person didn't run. A young woman named Riley stood frozen behind the bar counter. She was a waitress there, one of those people who showed up every day to serve drinks and food, who knew every regular customer by name, who listened to people's problems while pouring their drinks. She was nothing special in the eyes of the world. Just a human doing her job. But she was different in this moment. Riley wasn't looking at the Emperor. Her eyes were fixed on the small dragon in his arms. She could see the prince struggling, his tiny chest heaving, his little claws gripping at the Emperor's scales. She could see the pain in his eyes. No fear. Just pain. Something in her just moved. Not her brain telling her what to do. Not logic or strategy. Just her heart. She stepped out from behind the counter and walked forward while everyone else ran backward. The Emperor watched her approach, confused. No human had ever done this before. No human had ever walked toward him when they had the chance to flee. "Hey there, little one," Riley said softly. Her voice was calm and kind, like she was talking to a scared animal. Because that's what the prince was, scared and hurt and alone. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She reached out her hands gently. Kaithrax could have incinerated her with a single breath. He could have destroyed her without even thinking about it. But something about her calm made him pause. She wasn't showing fear. She wasn't showing worship or anger or anything else he expected from humans. She was just showing care. The Emperor, slowly and carefully, lowered his chest so the small prince was within Riley's reach. His claws were shaking slightly, a movement nobody would have noticed unless they were really watching. Because deep down, even an emperor who had ruled for 3 centuries was terrified. His son was broken. His son was wrong. And that meant his son wasn't worthy of anything in the world of dragons. Riley gently took Prince Velmoth into her arms. The small dragon was heavier than he looked, but light enough that she could hold him without struggling. She cradled him like he was precious, like he mattered, like he was worth something just because he existed, not because of what he could do or what he looked like. The prince made a soft sound, almost like a purr, almost like relief. For the first time in his short life, someone was holding him without disgust or pity. Someone was holding him like he was loved. Kaithrak stood frozen. His golden eyes watched this human woman hold his son. In 300 years of ruling an empire, in 300 years of wars and politics and power plays, nothing had ever made him feel like this. Not weak exactly, but something close to it. Something vulnerable. Something real. The tavern had gone completely silent. Everyone who had run away stopped outside and peered back through the windows and open door. Nobody understood what they were seeing. A human woman holding the infant prince of the Dragon Emperor. And the Emperor just watching. Just allowing it. Riley looked up at Kaithrax and smiled. A real smile. Not forced. Not trying to be brave or clever. Just honest kindness from one being to another. "What's his name?" she asked simply. The Emperor didn't answer right away. He just kept staring at his son being held with such gentleness. Then he spoke, his voice deep and rumbling like an earthquake that moved through the tavern. "Velmoth," he said quietly. "His name is Velmoth." And that's when everything started to change. The next evening, nobody expected to see the Emperor again. But he came back. And the evening after that. And the one after that. Every single night, Kaithrax would arrive at the tavern just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The humans who worked there had stopped being terrified. They'd started getting used to it, which was strange. You don't really get used to a 300-year-old dragon showing up in your workplace. But somehow they did. Riley was always waiting for him. She'd have a quiet corner prepared, away from the other customers. She'd have fresh water ready for the prince, and sometimes she'd bring milk that she'd warmed up specially. She treated Prince Velmoth like he was just another customer's child. No big deal. No fear. No weird reverence. Just normal human kindness. The thing about Prince Velmoth was that he was suffering. You could see it in the way he moved. His little body hurt. The twisted wings that hung from his back weren't just wrong, they were painful. They would spasm sometimes and the prince would make these small sad sounds. But Riley didn't treat him like he was broken. She treated him like he was a kid who needed help, and then she helped him. On the third night she started showing him things. Simple things. She'd set up a wooden cup on the bar counter and then roll a small ball toward it. Velmoth would watch it with his big eyes. Then Riley would show him how to push it with his little claws. It took the prince a long time to understand what she wanted. His movements were clumsy and uncontrolled. His twisted wings would flap uselessly when he got excited. But Riley never made him feel bad about it. "Good job," she'd say. "You're getting it. Try again." She'd sing to him too. Not fancy dragon songs or anything like that. Just simple human songs. Songs about sunshine and rain and things that grow. Her voice wasn't perfect. She couldn't really sing that well. But Velmoth loved it anyway. He'd make these little chirping sounds trying to copy her. It was like watching a kid learn to talk for the first time. Kaithrax sat in the shadows watching everything. He sat where the lamplight didn't reach him, where he could see but nobody could really see him. And he watched his son laugh. Actually laugh. The prince's little body would shake with joy when Riley would do something silly, like pretend to be confused about which direction was up. The emperor had never heard his son make sounds like that before. On the fifth night Riley started talking. Not just to Velmoth. To Kaithrax too. She knew he was there in the shadows. She wasn't stupid. She just pretended she wasn't talking directly to him while she definitely was. "You know," she said while helping the prince practice moving his legs in different ways, "humans aren't all the same either. Not everyone's body works the way it's supposed to. But that doesn't mean anything about who they are as people." She told stories while she worked. She told him about a human named David who couldn't move his legs but became a teacher and changed thousands of students' lives. She talked about a woman named Patricia who was born deaf but became an artist whose paintings made people cry. She described a man named Thomas who lost his arms in an accident but learned to paint with his feet and his mouth and became famous for it. "The thing is," Riley said, kneeling down to help Velmoth stretch his twisted wings gently, "humans figured out a long time ago that being different doesn't make you less. It just makes you different. And different can be really powerful if you let it be." Kaithrax had never heard anything like this before. In dragon culture, weakness meant death. Deficiency meant exile. You were supposed to be perfect or you weren't supposed to exist at all. That was just how things were. That was the way of his people. But this human kept saying something completely different. She kept saying that broken things could still be beautiful and valuable. On the seventh night, something happened that changed everything. Velmoth was struggling with something, trying to pick up a piece of fruit that Riley had given him. His twisted wings were getting in the way and he was getting frustrated. He made these little distressed sounds and his whole small body tensed up. He looked like he might give up. But Riley didn't let him give up. She helped him adjust his position. She showed him a different way to approach the problem. And when he finally managed to hold the fruit, she cheered. Actually cheered. Like it was the greatest thing she'd ever seen. And Kaithrax laughed. It wasn't a cold laugh. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a real laugh that came from deep inside him. A laugh that sounded like joy. The emperor watched his son succeed at something small and simple and ordinary, and he felt something break open inside his chest. Something that had been locked away for 300 years. For the first time in his life, the Dragon Emperor understood what it meant to be proud of someone for just being themselves. Nobody knew how long Kaithrax could keep coming to the tavern without someone finding out. But secrets have a way of spreading, especially when they involve an emperor. Word travels fast in the dragon world. Other dragons had noticed their ruler missing night after night. Guards had followed him. Questions were asked. And eventually the truth came out. The emperor was spending his evenings with a human, and he was keeping something hidden. It started as whispers in the Dragon Council chambers. Then it became official concern. Then it became something darker. Because when the High Lords of the Drakkar Imperium discovered what Kaithrax was actually doing, they were horrified. Keeping a disabled prince alive? Letting him live past infancy? It violated everything dragons believed in. Everything they'd built their entire civilization around. The delegation arrived without warning on the 8th night. They came through the tavern door like a storm. There were 5 of them, all massive and terrifying, all covered in battle scars and wearing the gold armor of the Dragon Council. Their leader was Commander Victor, a dragon who had served in 3 wars and looked like he'd won all of them. His scales were the color of old blood. His eyes were cold and empty, like looking into a void. Riley was the first to see them. She was carrying a tray of drinks when the door swung open and the temperature in the tavern seemed to drop 50 degrees. The humans scattered. The bartender disappeared into the back room. But Riley just stood there, holding her tray, watching these enormous dragons approach. Commander Victor walked straight toward Kathrax, who was sitting with Velmoth. The prince was sleeping against his father's scaled chest, his twisted wings draped awkwardly across his tiny body. The commander's jaw clenched when he saw it. "Emperor," Victor said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "We need to talk about this situation." Kathrax stood slowly, carefully protecting his sleeping son. "There's nothing to discuss," the emperor said quietly. "My son lives. That's all you need to know." "Your son," another dragon spat, a female named Cassandra with a voice like breaking glass, "is an abomination. He should have been put down at birth. That's the law. That's the way." The other dragons nodded. They'd come prepared for this conversation. They'd come with arguments and tradition and centuries of precedent backing them up. They'd come ready to do what needed to be done. Victor drew his blade. It was massive, longer than a human was tall, and it caught the lamplight as it came free from his sheath. The sound of steel sliding against metal echoed through the tavern. Some of the humans who were hiding in the back room screamed. "Give us the prince," Victor commanded. "We'll handle this ourselves. Quickly. Painlessly. The way it should have been done from the start. You can go back to ruling your empire, and we can all pretend this embarrassment never happened." Kathrax's body went rigid. His wings spread slightly, a sign of aggression. His claws dug into the tavern floor, leaving cracks in the wood. The other dragons tensed, ready for violence. They had come prepared to kill if necessary. They had come to destroy what they saw as a problem. And then Riley moved. She stepped forward and planted herself directly between Commander Victor and Prince Velmoth. Her small human body looked absolutely ridiculous compared to the massive dragon warrior. She was like a mouse trying to block a charging elephant. But she didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't show any fear at all. "No," she said simply. "You're not hurting him." The dragons stared at her like she was insane. Victor actually laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that bounced off the tavern walls. "Move, human, or we'll move you." But Riley didn't move. She just looked back at Kathrax. And something passed between them in that moment. A kind of understanding. The Emperor saw something in this young woman that he'd been slowly discovering all week. He saw courage. He saw conviction. He saw someone who believed in something so strongly that she'd stand against an entire delegation of dragon warriors without weapons or power or anything except her own moral certainty. Kathrax's roar came out like an explosion. It was so loud that bottles fell off shelves. The tavern walls shook. The sound was primal and ancient and filled with an anger so pure that even the battle-hardened dragons took a step back. The Emperor moved forward, protective of both Riley and his son, and his presence filled the entire room. "Enough," Kathrax said, and his voice was different now. Not angry. Something worse. Something final. "I am done listening to this." He looked directly at Victor and then at each of the other High Lords in turn. "You all speak of strength and worth as if they're the same thing. You've been speaking that lie for thousands of years. My son may have broken wings, but he has a mind that's sharp. He has a heart that's kind. He has value that has nothing to do with whether he can fly or fight or meet your standards of perfection." The dragons shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. "I've ruled this empire for 300 years, Kathrax continued, and I've watched us destroy ourselves with this philosophy. We've culled the weak. We've praised the strong. And what have we become? A civilization that can't see beauty in anything except domination." He looked down at Riley and his expression softened. "This human woman taught me something in just 1 week that I couldn't learn in 300 years. She taught me that worth isn't measured by power. That love isn't earned through perfection. That a life, any life, has value simply because it exists." Kathrax drew himself up to his full height, his voice becoming a declaration that echoed through the tavern like thunder. "The old ways are ending. Tonight. Now, my son will live. He will be raised with honor and love. And any dragon who has a problem with that can challenge me." He paused, letting his golden eyes sweep across each of them. "I dare you to try." Commander Victor's grip tightened on his blade. His scales darkened with rage. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to losing arguments. For decades, he'd been the voice of tradition in the Dragon Council, and tradition had always won. But now, looking at Emperor Kaithrax standing before him with absolute conviction, Victor realized something terrifying. The Emperor had changed. And if the Emperor had changed, everything else might change too. "You're making a mistake," Victor said coldly. "A terrible mistake. You think the rest of the Empire will follow you into this madness? You think the warrior clans will accept a crippled prince as heir? You think the old families will bow to the vision of a man who's been corrupted by a human?" His words hung in the air like poison. Around the Dragon Empire, news of the standoff was spreading. Other High Lords were gathering. Military commanders were being called to attention. The Dragon world was splitting into factions. Those who stood with Kaithrax and his new vision, and those who stood with Victor and the old ways. It was the beginning of something that could destroy everything. But Kaithrax didn't back down. He stepped closer to Victor, his own claws gleaming. "Then let them come. Let them challenge me. I've ruled for 300 years and I've never been stronger than I am right now. Because I finally understand what I've been fighting for. Not power. Not domination. But the right of every being to exist and thrive regardless of how they were born." Riley watched this unfold and her mind was already working ahead. She could see where this was going. Civil war. Dragons fighting dragons. And humans caught in the middle. She'd seen enough conflict to know that violence wasn't the answer. There had to be another way. She stepped forward again, but this time she wasn't blocking anyone. She was walking toward Kaithrax. When she reached him, she spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "There's another way," Riley said. "You don't have to fight them. You have to show them they're wrong." Kaithrax looked down at this small human woman who'd somehow become so important to him. "How?" he asked. Riley turned to face the gathered dragons. She didn't look scared even though she should have been absolutely terrified. She was one human surrounded by 5 massive dragons who were ready for violence. But she spoke anyway. "What if we showed you something?" she said. "What if we proved that weakness and strength aren't opposites? What if we proved that humans and dragons can learn from each other? That we can make each other better?" "Pretty words," Cassandra hissed. "Empty promises from a creature that will be dust while we still rule." But Riley wasn't done. "I'm asking for one thing," she continued. "Give us a year. 1 year to build something. A place where dragons and humans learn together. Where we share knowledge. Where we prove that different doesn't mean broken." She looked directly at Victor. "If after 1 year you still think the old ways are right, then we'll step aside. But if you're so confident in your traditions, you should be confident enough to let us try." It was a gamble. A huge gamble. But something about Riley's certainty made even Victor pause. The commander looked at Kaithrax, then back at Riley. "An academy," Riley said. "Humans teaching dragons. Dragons teaching humans. Right here in the neutral zone between our worlds." The tavern fell silent. The other dragons looked at each other. Some were nodding slowly. They'd come ready for war, but an alternative was being offered. A chance to prove their point without bloodshed. But Victor wasn't convinced. "The boy still dies," he said flatly. "That's my condition. We agree to this academy, but Prince Velmoth is removed from succession. He's removed from everything." It was a brutal compromise. It was also, Riley realized, the best they were going to get. Before Kaithrax could respond, something unexpected happened. A younger dragon stepped forward from the back of the tavern. He was smaller than Victor, probably only 100 years old or so, practically a child by dragon standards. His name was Logan and he was a warrior, a soldier in the dragon military. But he'd been watching everything unfold. "I think the human is right," Logan said, his voice steady but respectful. "I think we should try it." Another younger dragon stepped forward. Then another. Within moments, there were a dozen young dragons standing with Kaithrax and Riley. They were the generation that hadn't spent their entire lives believing the old ways were absolute truth. They were dragons who'd started questioning things. Dragons who'd wondered if there might be better ways. Victor looked around and realized he'd lost. Not in combat but something worse. He'd lost the future. These young dragons represented the coming age, and they weren't going to follow him into the past. "Fine," Victor said bitterly, sheathing his blade with a sharp metallic scrape. "Build your academy. Teach your lessons. But understand this, when it fails, when humans prove themselves worthless, when the boy shows his weakness and drags your empire down, I'll be waiting. I'll be waiting to rebuild what you've destroyed." He turned and walked toward the door, the other old guard dragons following him reluctantly. But they went. They didn't fight. They didn't try to execute the prince. They accepted defeat because the alternative, forcing a war against their own younger generation, was unthinkable. As they disappeared into the night, Riley breathed out slowly. The tavern erupted in quiet conversation. Dragons and humans began talking to each other for the first time. Tentatively. Carefully. But they were talking. Kaithrax looked down at Prince Velmoth, who'd woken up during all the commotion. The small dragon was looking up at his father with confusion and curiosity. "Come on," Riley said to Kaithrax, smiling. "We have an academy to build." The Emperor looked at this young human who just changed the course of his entire civilization. And he nodded. "Yes," he said. "We do." 5 years had passed since that night in the tavern. The Academy of Unified Learning had grown from a simple idea into something nobody could have predicted. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a movement. It was a revolution happening peacefully, day after day, in classrooms and workshops and training grounds where dragons and humans worked side by side. Prince Velmoth stood in the main hall of the academy, looking out at the students gathered below. His twisted wings hung at his sides, still not functional, still shaped wrong. But he'd grown stronger. His body had developed in unexpected ways. His mind had become sharp as a blade. He was 23 years old now, still young by dragon standards but old enough to lead. Old enough to matter. He was the director of the Adaptive Sciences Division, a department created specifically to solve problems that traditional dragon and human thinking couldn't address alone. The division worked on everything from designing tools for people with limited mobility to creating new architectural methods that worked for beings of different sizes and abilities. Under Velmoth's leadership, it had become the most innovative section of the entire academy. "Next presentation," Velmoth called out, his voice clear and confident in a way it had never been when he was young. A human named Patrick stepped forward with a dragon named Iris. They were partners in the research team, and they'd been working on something revolutionary. A prosthetic wing system that could actually help dragons fly even if their natural wings were damaged or deformed. It wouldn't work perfectly. It wouldn't make disabled dragons exactly like able-bodied dragons. But it would give them options. It would give them freedom. As Patrick explained the mechanics in human terms and Iris translated the concepts into dragon thinking, Velmoth felt a surge of pride. This was what his father had envisioned. This was what Riley had believed could happen. Humans and dragons, pushing each other to think differently, to solve problems in ways neither species could alone. Across the Empire, Emperor Kaithrax was in his throne room with Riley. She'd been given an official title now, the Architect of Change. It was a position that had never existed before in dragon history. It meant she had access to the Emperor, to the Council, to resources and authority that most humans would never dream of. But Riley hadn't let it go to her head. She was still the same person who'd stepped between a dragon warrior and a helpless prince 5 years ago. "The western provinces are asking about setting up a second academy," Riley told Kaithrax, reading from a list of reports. "And the southern clans want to send their young dragons here for the full program. We're getting more requests for enrollment than we can handle." Kaithrax listened, but his attention was on something else. He was watching Riley work. The way she moved between tasks with absolute focus. The way she genuinely cared about every decision. The way she transformed from a simple tavern waitress into someone who was literally reshaping an empire's entire philosophy. "How many students do we have now?" the Emperor asked. 3,000, Riley said. "And that's just at the main academy. The satellite locations have another 2,000. In 5 years, we've gone from 0 to 5,000 students learning together. Can you believe that?" Kaithrax could believe it because he'd watched it happen. He'd seen young dragons arrive at the academy full of old prejudices and leave as friends with humans they'd learned from. He'd seen humans come in thinking dragons were mindless brutes and leave with deep respect for dragon philosophy and history. He'd seen relationships form. Real friendships. Even a few romantic partnerships that had shocked traditionalists on both sides. "There's something else," Riley said, her expression becoming more serious. "Commander Victor requested a meeting. He wants to talk about returning to the council." Kaithrax's golden eyes narrowed slightly. Victor had been exiled for 5 years. He'd disappeared into the outer territories, refusing to accept the new order. But apparently, even he was starting to realize that the Empire wasn't going backward. "What do you think?" the Emperor asked. Riley considered it carefully. "I think," she said slowly, "that if he's genuinely changed his mind, he should get a chance to contribute. But not immediately. Let him spend time at the academy first. Let him see what his people are becoming. Let him understand what he was fighting against. Kthrak smiled. This was why he valued Riley's counsel so much. She wasn't interested in revenge or punishment. She was interested in transformation. In giving people, even difficult people, the chance to grow. That evening, the Emperor attended a celebration in the Academy's Grand Hall. It was a graduation ceremony for the first full class of students who'd spent all 5 years learning together since the Academy's founding. There were dragons and humans standing together, receiving their certificates of completion. When Velmoth was called to speak, the hall went quiet. The prince moved to the center of the stage, his twisted wings folded carefully against his back. He looked out at the gathered crowd, at his father sitting in the honored seat, at Riley standing beside him, at thousands of students and teachers who'd been part of this journey. When I was born, Velmoth began, his voice steady and clear, I was supposed to be a shame. I was supposed to be hidden away or destroyed. That's what the old traditions said. That's what most of my people believed. He paused, letting his gaze move across the faces in the room. But then a human woman walked into a tavern and changed everything. She didn't have power. She didn't have authority. She didn't have weapons or political connections. All she had was kindness. All she had was the belief that every life has value. Velmoth looked directly at Riley, and there was genuine love in his expression. Not romantic love, but something equally powerful. The love you feel for someone who's saved your life. She taught my father something. She taught our empire something. She taught us that strength isn't about being perfect. Strength is about caring for each other. Strength is about learning together. Strength is about becoming better than we were before. The hall erupted in applause. Dragons and humans cheered together. And in that moment, watching his son address a unified crowd of two species that had once been enemies, Kthrax understood something profound. 300 years of rule had given him power. But 5 years with one kind human had given him wisdom. 5 years had shown him that the greatest strength an empire could have wasn't military might or political dominance. It was compassion. It was the willingness to change. It was the courage to admit you'd been wrong and to rebuild yourself into something better. Across the galaxy, news of the Drakkar Imperium's transformation was spreading. Other empires were watching. Other species were wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was a better way to organize society. A way that didn't require perfection. A way that didn't require crushing those who were different. And it had all started with one act of kindness. One human waitress who saw a suffering child and decided to help, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. Riley caught Kthrax's eye across the hall and smiled. The Emperor smiled back. The Dragon Emperor who'd ruled for 300 years and spent most of that time believing in the old ways had finally become something new. He'd become a father who loved his son not despite his disabilities but including them. He'd become a leader who understood that true power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. The celebration continued late into the night. Humans and dragons danced together. They shared stories. They laughed. And somewhere in the background, Prince Velmoth was already planning the next expansion of the Academy, already thinking about how to reach more people, already working toward a future where different wasn't dangerous. It was just different, and that was beautiful. The mightiest empire in the known galaxy had been transformed not by conquest or force, but by one person's simple act of caring for someone in need. And the lesson was clear to anyone paying attention. Compassion wasn't weakness. It was the most powerful force in the universe. It could reshape civilizations. It could change hearts that had been hardened for centuries. It could turn enemies into partners and strangers into family. All it took was the willingness to see someone's worth, even when the rest of the world said they had none.